Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar. We're glad you all could make the time, and we look forward to hosting you in an engaging discussion, hopefully with participation from a broad group of folks. We'll get started in a few minutes. We just want to make sure folks have the opportunity to get on. So we appreciate while you wait with us, and then we will begin shortly. Again, if you're joining us, we're waiting for a few more folks to jump on. So maybe another 30 seconds and we will get the webinar started. Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started today. Again, appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. Today, we will be having a good conversation around the changing facets of the technology outsourcing landscape. My name is John Frazier. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Synoptek. And joining me today is Mr. Mike Bank, who is our VP of Sales and Alliances. Generally speaking, we're going to be talking and sharing information regarding tech outsourcing as a general topic, both before and after the pandemic. We really want to get into and share our perspective and views on tech outsourcing versus what we call strategic outsourcing or strategic sourcing, and really what it can do to help differentiate the way you engage in your business and with your partners. We'll also share, besides the market details, a case study where we've actually been able to bring it all together with one of our customers and actually developed truly meaningful outcomes that has helped the customer be better through the partnership than they could have otherwise. I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but the point is, the business landscape is changing. I would hazard to say the amount of change in the business landscape over the past 20 months has probably outweighed the changes for the previous 20 years. So many different drivers in so many different directions. You can see the source of information coming from many, many different aspects of the market. But the moral of the story here is business is changing at an ever-increasing rate. And as an organization, each and every one of us needs to be able to adapt to those changes and actually figure out how we leverage the change to be a business advantage. So to that point, I would like to hand it off to Mike, where Mike's actually going to spend some time talking through some of the data and detail and provide a perspective as to what it means. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, John. There's been a lot of talk and there's been a bit of data about during the pandemic, how organizations have responded, but very little data about post-pandemic and what we can expect in 2022. So what we want to do is we want to provide some data to you, not only look back, but most importantly, looking forward. And we're going to do this over the next couple slides across four areas. One is let's take a look at IT spending. Let's take a look at company size. let's take a look at digital transformation initiatives and industries, all looking, and we'll provide a little bit of information on but we're going to focus mostly on what a lot of the experts are seeing in 2022. So the slide you have in front of you, I thought it was pretty interesting. The quote from McKinsey that pretty much said that that the coronavirus itself sped up digital transformation by 6 years. I didn't think it was that severe, but when we look back into the data and what companies are actually doing, it really does make sense. And it's also no surprise that almost all the organizations there have reprioritized their initiatives, with half of them not having the resources to perform it. So they looked at outside companies to help them do that. Specifically, if we dive into the spending table, we see a couple key items. One is we see that overall spending in 2022 will equal levels prior to the pandemic, and that number is 7%. So that's kind of the benchmark for all the major areas. The leading sectors are number one, software, which leads at 12%, coming out of 2021 versus 7% pre-pandemic. Two examples that are driving software. Number one, business process applications are expected to rise with 12% growth rate. This represents both the company, the largest single category in the software market with a 27% share and the fastest growing. These applications help improve common business processes like sales, marketing, customer service, finance, human capital, purchasing, contracting, product development, risk management, and payment. And then the second part is the information management apps looking to grow at about 8%. These are information management apps like BI, analytics, enterprise content management, and collaboration. Second sector to point out is that technology outsourcing will expand by 7% in 2022 versus pre-pandemic of 7%. The other thing that we found out is that the lowest level in 5 years for technology outsourcing was 5%. So if we look at across all of the categories, this is the most stable, least volatile of all segments. So strong growth in public cloud and private cloud infrastructure, which remains the dominant theme in this category. A lot of hybrid as well. And then some technology categories like security managed services and data insights will see over and above average growth. And then finally, in terms of technology consulting and system integration services, they will see steady strength of about 8% in 2022. It's interesting, it was pre-pandemic at 15%. Most of this work is being focused on system integration around cloud, increase on hybrid cloud and system integration for SaaS. Let's take a look at company size. So from the next slide,
you can advance the slide, Mike.
I'm sorry?
There you go.
Got it. Sorry. Thanks, folks. We can see that mid to large size organizations lead in seeking strategic sourcing partners to accelerate transformation projects and lean on third parties for ongoing manage and support of these transformation projects. I always like to ask the reason why. And when we look at the data for these mid to large size organizations, we see that many are moving and talking about going to more of a strategic outsourcing model and moving from cost reduction to driving deliberate innovation. So a lot of the drivers here are speed. A lot of that comes from delivery of IT platforms that are new or ones that are being modernized. Second is security. Third is development of new IT platforms like business applications. Fourth, that we're going to talk a lot about later, which really seems to be the biggest thorn, is the rapid access to skilled labor. And then finally, cost optimization. Note that I didn't say cost reduction, but optimization, specifically inside of programmatic and structural improvements, addressing improved efficiencies, productivity, and then shifting spend inside of IT organizations. So next, let's now talk about innovation, which is typically associated with digital transformation. So let's take a look a little bit at that data. So this is a recent survey from BCG of 200 mid to large organizations, and a couple findings. Most organizations changed their digital transformation agendas during the pandemic. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. Most are accelerating these, however, with the help of third parties, though. And a lot of that is due to the skills gap, as well as the lack of labor, also the need for speed to market. In fact, post-COVID-19, most of the investments are in cybersecurity at 55%, 49% in cloud migration and augmentation, 47% in AI and machine learning, and 46% in analytics. When we looked back pre-COVID, we actually said that's exactly in line with what it was pre-COVID. So the top three being cybersecurity, moving to cloud, and then deploying AI and ML. It's interesting that these are modern service portfolios, transformation services that companies are looking to remove them or move away from legacy products and services that they operate internally and gain an edge on the market. And this survey suggests that companies are planning to accelerate these transformation projects and relying on the service providers to do so, even as they build in-house capabilities in other areas. So let's quickly look at industries. So this is a chart via the U.S. Department of Commerce and was also stated in a recent Forrester report. This shows that there's growth across all sectors for 2022, but with a wide range of how strong that growth will actually be. Note that the total U.S. 2021 growth rate is 6.1, and in 2022 expected 6.9%. So there's the bar, and you can see that kind of right in the middle. I know that this might be a tough illustration to read. Healthcare has the strongest growth rate at 10.6%. A lot of this due to federal funding and pandemic care, as the also looking at the resumption of normal medical care now actually comes forward, and there's going to be a respective revenue surge there. Other 2022 growth leaders expected, many due to the increased and recovered demand for products and services, as well as injection of federal funds, construction, engineering, manufacturing, media, pharma, and data processing. Each of these seeking innovative means to produce more effectively and efficiently, faster to customers, delivery-wise, and leverage of modern service portfolios. And unfortunately, there's other industries here that won't be much of a surprise, but they're lagging, some in a growth of 3 to 6%. So that's some interesting data that kind of sets the table for the next discussion, which is looking at why strategic sourcing is not necessarily a means to reduce cost alone, but more so to drive innovation and create winning themes in the market for companies. And there are eight things that we've acknowledged today around strategic sourcing that are driving behavior. Excuse me. Number one, there seems to be an even bigger change in the role of outsourcers. Strategic outsourcers are recognized much more so and demanded to be advisors and not just read performance reports, but be participating in strategic planning with customers around risk prevention, system design, and generally act as visionaries on what is possible for customers, and not just to be simple service providers that are tactical. Second one is focusing on long-term relationships, which goes hand in hand with the first one, but we see a much more stable cooperation and a co-ownership of programs versus just throwing programs over to service providers and wishing them the best, and then creating complaints and having to recompete and fire service providers. So there's much more of a cooperation model. Contracts are also being modified and looked at differently. There's a shift to outcome-based discovery, design, as well as expectations. Thus the prioritization is being switched from pricing outcomes to expected performance levels and business and management of risk. Fourth is the growing demand of specialization. So today, the pace of progress is swift, and the scope of digitalization, digital transformation can be vast, and it's really hard for any in-house IT department to stay in the know of everything that's going on in the high-tech realm. In the world of limited access to skilled and affordable labor that we're going to talk about here next, there's a demand for both high-quality experts in broad, but now also very narrow and ever-changing fields. Strategic sourcers should hold a roster of experts and put the burden on the strategic sourcer in that regards to provide full IT lifecycle resources for innovation as well as management. And then there's adaptability. So businesses they will change their requirements and their needs in a split second, because the availability of data, customer expectations, customer sat, as well as supply chain, we have so much faster availability of data. And so 2022 is likely to keep this tendency, so it'll become essential for outsourcers to demonstrate a large amount of flexibility. Flexibility mostly in scaling up and down, revving up deployment processes, alterations to pre-arranged plans, reaction to the appearance of new technologies in the market, and then most importantly, again, upskilling personnel. Six, customers looking for outcome-based engagements and programs and service integrators instead of just these tactical, simple service providers. So rather than these tactical approaches of discovery, design, and support, strategic sourcing organizations are measuring current state, future state outcomes and held accountable for specific business results. And more importantly is the emphasis of business and IT transformation that's expected to occur alongside a leveling up, if you will, of the maturity status of where a customer is in a maturity model. And John is going to share that with you a little bit later here as a real example of what is a maturity model. Seventh, keeping pace with the cloud. No surprise, everybody has moved to the cloud or considering it, but what folks are not recognizing is that it is never a steady state. Customers have to hold the service providers accountable for optimization continuously, consumption, costing, multi-cloud federations, as well as operational management. And the knowledge to manage these cloud platforms is anything but easy. I just looked up at how many services AWS and Azure have, and each one has 200 services alone. So that's a tremendous amount of knowledge, a tremendous amount of skill set to manage those, as well as adaptability. And then finally, an increased drive for security awareness. Data and privacy are the most valuable assets of our time. More than half of the organizations today are looking to third parties to deliver this. And more companies are becoming more compliant with multiple standards. So sure, high trust is out there, PCI, NIST, and ISO, but there's new ones like CMMC, which is cybersecurity model certification. And that is something, while it's applied mostly to DoD contractors, it's got some great practices that are now being consumed and being demanded by many commercial sectors. So I talked a little bit about this, one, if not the largest factor driving strategic sourcing is today's labor market. So let's dive into that one. I'm going to pause and take a drink. Okay, so while you have been reading this very interesting information. Let me talk about what we're gonna dive into when we specifically address labor. Number one, we're going to take a look at job availability, unemployment. Second are skills gaps, and then third is the actual cost of labor. So on the slide, on the left here, where the source is the U.S. Labor Bureau of, U.S. Labor Bureau of Labor and Statistics. We're now at historical levels, low levels of unemployed individuals against job openings. And this is at 0.7%. Looking at IT specifically, the U.S. unemployment rate for IT is 1.76, where overall as a nation, we're at 4.2. We have held pretty steady at about 2 to 2.3 over the last 12 months ago to 18 months ago, but we've really seen this number fall, and it's quite concerning. It was interesting. We also pulled some data from Robert Half. And so you see the most sought after and the unemployment rates for these individuals here on the lower right. And so it's interesting also to see those positions that are in most need or have the lowest unemployment are those that are really associated with digital transformation, new initiatives, modernization, which all absolutely need to be a attribute of a strategic sourcing provider. I would say the other observation I had is that IT workers are truly in the driver's seat right now. It's not the employers. Candidates looking for a job aren't waiting around. They're even open to contracting. In fact, the percentage of workers planning to look for a new job who want to pursue a contracting career is 39% right now. The percentage of professionals who lose interest in a job if they don't hear back within 2 weeks of an interview, 62%. Percentage of job candidates that will ghost a potential employer if they feel strung along, 49%. So let's take a look at the gaps, skills gaps, as well as labor cost. So from skills gaps in a McKinsey study, 43% report existing skills gaps today, and 44% of the respondents say that the organization will face skills gaps within the next 5 years. So in other words, 87% say that they're either experiencing the gaps now or expect them within a few years. And when we asked where the greatest needs exist, they stated data analytics, developers, security engineers, and IT management. Secondly, and probably the most concerning to business owners, for guys like John, who runs IT organizations, is the labor cost alone. And the U.S. unemployment cost rose at the fastest pace on record in the third quarter as companies across a variety of sectors raised wages against the backdrop of these labor shortages that we were talking about earlier. 2 points. One is that the employment cost index, which is a broad gauge of wages and benefits, rose 1.3% from the prior quarter alone, according to the Labor Department. And this data was released in November. So it's less than 30 days ago. Year over year, that gauge increased 3.7%. Secondly, compensation gains underscore how tight that labor market is, and it's put pressure on many different types of firms to raise wages. Wages and salaries also rose at a record pace, surging 1.5 in the last quarter alone. So let's sum up the strategic sourcing in today's landscape. And first, let's draw a distinction between what I referenced before as common tech outsourcing and strategic sourcing. So first of all, we find that tech sourcing is really the de facto standard of a lot of service providers. It's transactional in nature, it's tactical in nature, it's simply keeping the lights on. It's very reactive and lacks a lot of problem management, and it has very little outcome-based approach from the beginning when you're engaging a customer to when you're sustaining them, and then there's very little evolution into a maturity model, and that John will talk about. And so it's not uncommon that we don't see a lot of optimization occurring. We don't see a lot of modernization or transformation. A lot of customers are kind of left behind. So 3 steps. First, start with an unbiased evaluation. Evaluate, validate, document the client's current and desired future state. Use a maturity model that will show. Number 2, tailor what is needed for the short, but don't forget about the long term. Design for both. Help the client modernize and optimize the IT environment quickly and in the long run, and then position technology to drive sustainable business outcomes that are measured. Fill the gaps with genuine thought leadership, resiliency, innovative ideas, address the skills gap, address mitigation of risk. And then finally, and most importantly, to all the stakeholders of that customer, it's got to be a rationalized and strategic asset. It can't be a cost center anymore. Looking at customers' technology organization, you've got to do so as an enabler and creating a systemic and long-term and holistic plan, and then continual evaluation of the company's initiatives against milestones and against business outcomes. So hopefully that helps everybody with a little bit of a definition between just tactical outsourcing, tech outsourcing, and strategic outsourcing, which brings us to our first poll.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Let's jump to that. Jump to the poll. So the polling question we have is specifically based on the definitions you just heard Mike talk through of what is strategic sourcing versus the technical outsourcer. What percentage of your partners do you think are those kind of strategic partners? And while you have a minute or two to respond to that, Mike's going to continue and talk a little bit more about the areas that we see a lot of demand.
Sure. So this chart, which is derived from a Forrester article, illustrates the top transformation practices and most important for today's leaders. But also note that these are the hardest resources to fill in the market. So for organizations that are leaning on internal resources alone, the Forrester found that 74% of IT decision makers agree that they cannot meet this demand for expertise and deliver these projects on time. So that's why we see over half of the organizations today leaning on strategic sourcing providers to help them. Security is one of the largest and probably the fastest growing right now. And again, the top 4 represent the initiatives driving transformation and modernization. And then, if we took a look at the services that are most being requested from strategic sourcing providers that need help and speed to market, number 1 is cloud advancement and security. It's a very close tie. You have automation, AI, machine learning. We've got applications and business management systems, platform upgrade and modernization, and then a lot of workforce productivity, improving the collaboration and communications with a number of employees that are obviously off-site, but also how to communicate with customers in this digital world.
Thanks, Mike. And I know the first poll is probably still open, but the kind of the initial feedback is of those that have responded, the vast majority of you all believe that maybe 10 to 30% of your partners are actually functioning is in this strategic capacity, which is very interesting because, we believe that, the value for an organization is absolutely tied to that engagement. So I'm going to rush you a little bit. We're going to go ahead and open up our second polling question. And as Mike just talked about some of the areas that are indicative of growth in the strategic sourcing area. The second polling question is, what are the technology services that your company have outsourced recently? Again, while you take the time to respond to that, I'll have Mike continue on and talk about some of the specific tactics and actions related to assessing strategic sourcing.
So starting with the why, I think someone famous said that, companies are really looking to do two things: achieve the unique business outcomes for their industry, their size organization. Those have to be determined, documented, and agreed upon. And then secondly is the mitigation of risk, whether it be cyber threats, competition for IT talent, liability, obsolescence, multi-supplier management. So in many cases, customers are determined to realize these larger goals by developing the following capabilities that need to be measured from a current state to a future state. Could be scalability, could be cost optimization, speed of decision making, go to market, employee retention, customer experience, employee sat, and then a lot of times financially, shareholder value and margins and EBITDA. Really, organizations can't afford to be a cost center. They have to think 2 years out and take a deliberate commitment towards innovation versus just operations and keeping the lights on. They've got to move towards a mindset of measuring. They have to move towards a mindset of being humble. Where do they sit inside a maturity model? Where do they require to be? Not where they want to be, but where do they need to be? And creating opportunities for optimization in the long run, and then finally absolutely solving the problems for talent and shortages. In terms of how to do that, number one is we always suggest being very selective about partnerships. Take a step back, assess who you're with, if you're with somebody today, and make sure that they really are a strategic provider. Challenge them, all right? If they can't step up, maybe it's time to reevaluate who you're with. Bridge those talent gaps. Every enterprise has to evaluate the capabilities that can develop in-house with the talent that it has to procure from service providers. Companies can reduce a lot of their risk for transformation projects by just turning to the service providers who already have a deep bench and a wide capability to do that for them. In fact, many companies are trying to develop this in tandem with service providers. Future-proof the contracts and take a look and make sure that those are performance-based. Maybe even consider them to be outcome-based. Focus on resilience, right? Where companies have to measure and ensure that they're staying resilient and bouncing back from adversity across a number of different sources. And then always persist with a transformational agenda and not just an operations management agenda.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And before I jump into the results of the second polling question, I do want to encourage everybody to ask your questions. Use the Q&A box to get your questions in before we get to the end. A little bit of the outcome from the second polling question around what services have your companies actually outsourced. It's somewhat surprising only because the answers landed in two categories only. 75% of you say cloud advancement and security are things that you've outsourced, and 25 around the modernization of the apps and infrastructure. It's a little surprising that there's nothing in the communication, collaboration, AI, data management, but not surprising that there's a heavy focus on cloud security and app modernization. So I do want to go ahead and move into one of the case studies, or the case study today that we want to share. And what's really interesting and why we love this case study is this was a tenured customer that had a technology outsourcing relationship with us. for quite a long time. Kind of singularly focused, dimensional sort of relationship. And we saw their business evolving in a way that we knew we could have an impact. So we actually, about 4 years ago, sat down with the leadership of this organization and actually developed an outcome-based strategy for taking them from current state to what as we talked to them and figured out, really what their business objectives were, to a more strategic outcome. The things that they were being challenged with was stability in the environment. They had lots of technology downtime. They had IT leadership, but that leadership wasn't capable of actually acquiring, developing, and maintaining the skills needed to support the quickly evolving organization. And as I said before, they engaged us as a technology outsourcer. They had several technology outsourcers. So we had multi-vendor management, which really created a challenge for them to drive efficiency. What we do know that, they were looking to outsource a good deal of the activities. And we use that as the opportunity to talk about what these outcomes could look like. At the end of the day, in conversations, it was quickly determined the goal was really to reduce risk. Granted, there was a desire to reduce the overall cost and spend. There was a greater desire to increase productivity and drive top line revenue. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those results. And I won't go overly deep in this. If you really want to get the entire methodology and the detail, you can go to our website. This is a total economic impact study that we conducted with Forrester. And the details are available to you if you register for the study paper. But the takeaway here is really through the engagement, through the focus on developing specific goals for outcomes versus just operations and management, we were able to help in several different ways. The not so surprising areas are obviously, increasing productivity, due to elimination of technology downtime. That's interesting. We actually helped overall increase productivity and reduce the cost through identifying duplication or duplicity of effort and activity, both across the multi-vendor space as well as within the organization themselves. The really, really interesting area is we were able to actually help drive increased revenue through both the environmental improvements as well as some projects focused on the ability for them to optimize the data insights that they had around how and by the way, this is a nonprofit healthcare organization, how they actually scheduled and managed the clinical the clinical events. So not only did we help them drive a real ROI based on productivity, based on cost optimization, but we were able to actually help them achieve a revenue growth achievement through some of these strategies. Now, the question is, how do you do that? Besides just identifying the target, it's not an accidental state that you get there. We actually, employ what we call our capability maturity model. And while, obviously that's not something, that we came up with, the reality is, we actually use it to a strategic advantage with our customers. The very first thing we'll do when we engage with a customer is to sit down and benchmark with the customer across many different areas. Typically, we start with 16 to 25 different areas and actually assess each of those areas to understand whether or not they are, in the more chaotic state or, best case scenario, defined and repeatable. We really occasionally in a specific area, we'll find a customer that has evolved to a level 3. But generally speaking, when we engage with customers, most customers are in that, level 1 to 1.5 range in terms of maturity. But not only do we benchmark that at the onset of the relationship, we use this as a guide, and we continuously measure improvement across all of those areas in order to help the customer drive to a greater than achievement. What's interesting about this is it's not linear in its life cycle. We have customers that may achieve a level 2 in a certain area, but let's say they undergo an acquisition, and that acquisition activity may actually knock that particular area of focus back down to a level 1. And so it's kind of a rinse and repeat sort of process to move them along their maturity life cycle. And it's through this engagement and the tracking of those outcomes, we are able to actually develop or deliver very specific, measurable, meaningful measures for those customers. Well, I know we're kind of running out towards the end of time, so I do want to open this up for Q&A. So I would ask, do we have questions queued up yet from the audience? Okay, first question. Have you noticed any trends or shifts in the demand for a specific type of technology outsourcing? As people are returning to offices and businesses are preparing for the new year? And if so, why do you think that is? Mike, I know you engage with a lot of our customers, a lot of our prospects. Have you seen a shift in this focus as we progress through 2021?
Gosh, when we look at the projects that we're not seeing a shift in projects. We are seeing a shift in performance-based support. A lot of focus on end user client sat measurements. As folks are coming back to the office, there's a little bit of a shift of the type of incidents that we're seeing, a little bit in the volume, but employers want to make sure that if their employees are coming back in the office, that IT is never a reason that they would want to continue to work at home. And so whether it be something as simple as the peripherals working and making sure that they're monitored, whether it be access to business management systems, the demand is that IT is very reliant, resilient, but those innovation projects that we're seeing are still continuing, have not changed, and they're heavy around business management, application development, definitely security, right? So a lot of security that was deployed because of the home workers, continued focus on security while they're in the office. John, what have you seen?
Go ahead, Mike.
What have you seen, John?
No, I agree. I mean, I think all of those drivers are, kind of creating a demand for the customers. It, hasn't been a major shift, but there is kind of a pent up requirement for addressing some of these areas. Real quick, I know we're going to run out of time here pretty quick, so I want to get to the questions we do have. Question number 2 is, what is your take on the current talent shortage, and do you see the impact it is having in the IT role? And then the follow-up to that is, what are you doing to ensure stability for your customers? I'm going to say absolutely. We're seeing it, no doubt, just like the rest of the market. I will say, as a managed service provider, the differentiation we have to a lot of our customers is we have scale, where we don't have a dependency on 1 or 2 people in any given area or function. We actually have many folks across these functions. So it gives us the ability to absorb some of the fluctuation in resourcing. I mean, the other thing that we do is we really strive to create an environment where our employees can learn and grow across these different disciplines. So they get personal satisfaction, they get a view to career opportunities and growth. And that really creates a little bit of stickiness as opposed to, some organizations where they just don't have that ability to cross-pollinate. So that certainly has helped us somewhat and helped us make sure our delivery to the customers we serve stays as stable as possible through these times. Well, I know we're out of time. I want to thank everybody for your time in showing up today. Certainly, if you have any follow-up questions or if there are any questions that we haven't been able to get to, please feel free to come to our website and you can connect to us through there and ask the questions, and we will get back to you answers for anything that you desire. Mike, any follow-up from you?
No, thank you all very much.
Thanks, everybody.